Morning, Caroline. How are you?
I'm good, Stephen. It's nice to see the sun shining, which there hasn't been much of recently, I have to say. But no, good. Busy week ahead and looking forward to being on holiday next week.
Excellent. Excellent. So, before we get started, Caroline, I know you were down at meetings in Edinburgh for a couple of days last week. Sometimes people can be quite dismissive of national meetings, and perhaps the more cynical amongst us might even be tempted to label them as jollies. But I know from working with you that there is some important work done down there. Last year, for example, a temporary uplift in mileage rates came out of meetings like that. So I just wondered if you wanted to outline what the meetings last week were about and what the benefits of them are to us as an organisation.
Yeah, happy to do that, Stephen. I'm smiling away because I remember the days fondly when I would have looked at people in roles such as this and thought, lucky them getting to go somewhere else for the day. I think my perception of that has changed somewhat now. But yeah, it's a valid question. So it's quite interesting in relation to the questions that are asked in these sessions, because quite a lot of the things that are asked in these sessions, not all of them, but a number of them are related to decisions that are made nationally. And as a public sector organisation, we're a managed service through Scottish Government, and we have to do a lot of our work, terms and conditions, etc., policy decision making, managing risks on a national basis. So yeah, you're right. Actually, in the past 3 weeks, I have been down in Glasgow and Edinburgh for different reasons. And so I meet with all board chief executives and Scottish Government once a month. I go to Edinburgh to do that. Sometimes it's in different places in Edinburgh, but the reasons that we do that are to discuss, I'm trying to recall things that were on the agenda when we met. So our national learning for winter and how we are planning together to make sure that we have a better winter this year than we did last. So something that's really important. Lots of digital systems, which I know cause irritation in our system. So things like ease or e-rostering, making sure that all the issues that you raise with me, I play them into the decision makers around how we move things forward. And we will often meet to discuss current risks. So access to planned care would be something, and work out together as Scotland how we can move things forward. There's also a lot on the agenda at the moment around terms and conditions, industrial action, and things that you'll be familiar with. So specifically, last week, for the past 3 weeks actually, I've been involved in the junior doctor industrial action negotiations, which is clearly very important for us. Similarly, that could be agenda for change. So these jobs do require us to advocate for our own geographical areas. So when I am doing that work, I am ensuring that policymakers, ministers, Scottish Government, colleagues across Scotland hear the views, and I represent the north of Scotland. Don't do that in isolation, do that with other chief execs from the north. So that's kind of the work that I do. And it's always nice to meet other people, to work with other people. And it is most definitely not a jolly. Doesn't mean that actually work shouldn't be fun. As you know, I advocate for that. My day when I go to Glasgow and Edinburgh, I try to go down on the train. So my day starts about 5:30. I do around about 3 hours of emails. My team love it when I'm on the train because I get quite a lot of work done. So I tend to do about 3 hours of emails on the way down, if not calls. The meeting is all day and usually finishes at about 6. And then I either come back up because I prefer to be at home with my family, or if I can't, then I stay in usually a Premier Inn, somewhere near to the location that I am meeting, and I spend most of my evening doing work and emails. So that's kind of the detail of what I do. But I think it is really important work, and really important that, as small as Scotland is, the North is well represented.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. Yeah, I would agree. Days that long, certainly aren't a jolly. So, yeah, thanks for taking the time to explain that. Before we get into this month's questions, I believe you got some updates on a few of the questions that we got last time, Caroline.
Yes, I did. Thought that would be helpful. So I've got a note of them on a screen just behind me, just in case you wonder, so that I make sure I don't forget things. So car parking, there was a lot of questions around car parking, and I've been involved in a number of discussions around that, specifically the review since we last met, Stephen. So there's loads of work going on. You and I are meeting with facilities and state colleagues in the next couple of weeks to look at what are some of the challenges that they are experiencing and the work that they're trying to do. And within that, we'll be talking about short, medium and long-term options for parking on the Foresterhill site, which has been a long-standing issue. And included in that will be the use of the multi-storey car park. But I think the key thing for people to hear, and certainly in the discussion with Ted, was around absolutely making sure we hear everybody's voice and then make the best decisions possible. One of the other things that I followed up on was around the dental cafe. If you remember, that was raised because the cafe at the Matty is going. So Chantal has kindly confirmed, remember I spoke about social enterprises in the last conversation. So Chantal has confirmed that we received 4 expressions of interest through that process since we last met, which is great. And they will be potentially involved in additional catering at both the dental school and Aberdeen Health Village. So the first stage of this at the moment, now we've got those expressions of interest, still remains exploratory in relation to what we need to do, but that's the kind of process that we're underway with at the moment. So we can keep you updated on that. Parent and child parking at the Lady Helen car park. Ted, who got a number of tasks from the last session, and the Transportation Oversight Group have agreed to look at the possibility of that in their next meeting when they come together, which is great. And staff gyms, I've had a number of conversations around the importance of actually getting to a position on this. And my deputy, Adam Caldwells, has agreed to join the sports committee's next meeting, which I don't have a date for, just to understand the level of discussion that's underway with that. And I made a commitment to meet with James Norman, who has taken over the lead on this work. And if I'm honest, Stephen, I can't remember if I've got a date in my diary or not with James yet. So David, who is my PA and will watch this, David, please can you chase that up if we don't have a date with James, because I know that's really important. And sorry, I've not got that info just now.
No, thanks, Caroline. I hope sort of updates like this at the beginning of each of the episodes gives our colleagues some assurance that the questions aren't just being asked and answered in isolation. There's actually your connections being made and your sort of additional information being sought out. So thank you for that. Let's go on to the submitted questions for this episode then. So the first one is from a number of people, including Erin Mackenzie, who's at Dr. Gray's Hospital and Children's Services, Fiona Fletcher and Christopher Driver, and a number of others who are anonymous. They've all been in touch to ask for an update on the removal of compulsory mask wearing in clinical areas. We got some news on that last week. I know, so would you like to give an update on that for people who perhaps aren't aware, Caroline?
Yeah, happy to do so, although I do think that it has been communicated in the Daily Brief, but I might be wrong in that. So we're recording this on Monday the 15th, and I think it usually goes out on a Thursday as long as there's nothing more exciting that people want to see. So my understanding is that as of tomorrow, which will be the 16th, there is no longer a requirement for patients, public or colleagues to wear face masks in clinical areas. So I know that will be welcomed by many colleagues and patients and public, especially colleagues that have asked me repeatedly on this session, when can you stop wearing them? I also recognise, however, that some people will be anxious about that. So I know from June Brown that people will still have the option to wear them if that makes them more comfortable, and we will continue to provide that supply of masks. So hopefully by the time you see this on Thursday, that will be the way in which we are working.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. Okay, next question is from Abby Whitelaw, who has written to us to say, "Hi Caroline, is there any possibility that there could be some form of catering or shop open overnight? As a student paramedic that does placements with Scottish Ambulance Service, and as a bank healthcare support worker that mainly works nights and weekends around my studies, the vending options are not always working or don't accept card payment, etc. I know my Scottish Ambulance Service colleagues would appreciate that too during waits, and I know that ward staff too would really appreciate a proper coffee to get us through the night. Even just later opening of the aroma at the emergency department, the weekend hours are really short, and Abby says that your senior colleagues really need the caffeine."
Yeah, thanks Abby for getting in touch. And this isn't the first time this question's been asked. And you've heard me speak before about the work that Chantal and Eleanor have continued and continue to do around trying to make sure we have the right catering facilities. Unfortunately, none of our catering or shops, non-patient, catering, I should say, or shops are subsidised, and therefore we cannot provide services that put our public funds, NHS public funds, at a position of loss. So at the moment, there is no additional plans to go beyond what we have put in place just now. And I think it was last year we put in place the vending machines. I might have got my timing mixed up with that. And actually the data from the vending machines demonstrates that they're not very well utilised. Now, of course, if they don't work, that could be a reason why, or indeed if you can't use cards. So I didn't appreciate that, if I'm honest. So if we assume that the vending machines work, and there is also, I think, an opportunity to get coffee from a vending machine, I think it's around about ED, then at the moment there is no other plans to provide more catering out of hours until we understand how we can do that more effectively going forward. So sorry, that's not the answer you'll have wanted to hear.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. Okay, the next question is from an anonymous primary care nursing colleague. There's a bit of preamble, but felt it was important, so I'll try and summarise it. The colleague says, "I'm writing to you in the hope that you can assist me locally in my frustrations in recognition of nurses, predominantly, although I do include my concerns for all of us, predominantly for those who work in the primary care settings of the NHS in Scotland. The colleague finds herself angry and frustrated that the Scottish Government and RCN, along with other unions, have been fighting on behalf of agenda for change nurses for months, and while they finally secured a deal, she says, in primary care many months ago, they were given a 5% pay rise without discussion or negotiation. We've been left, as always, wondering where or when, or if even, we will be recognised as a very busy and often under-resourced, overworked division of the NHS." The colleague continues that they're fully aware that most of us are employed directly by our general practice partners, who of course have the final decision on what we are, but my concern is that funding to them is not equal to that of the pay that has been agreed in secondary care. Hope you consider seriously my plea for an answer to this on the local level, as I've already messaged my MSP, Cabinet Secretary for Health, Pat Cullen of the Royal College of Nursing, and indeed the First Minister, and we're still looking for answers. I eagerly await your reply and hopefully support in finding a way forward with this matter locally. Many thanks for taking the time to listen.
Thanks, Stephen. Sorry, I can't. Was that colleague anonymous, or did Was there a name?
Yeah.
Anonymous. Okay.
Anonymous.
So I'll start off by saying that I absolutely understand the perspective that this colleague is coming from. I think that there's a few key things that I would like to say first. So the first thing is the contribution of practice nurses and colleagues that work in primary care generally is hugely valued. And I recognise that at the moment, terms and conditions and the monetary value that we put on contributions is very pertinent just now. Particularly, however, for practice nurses, I do think that the issue raised is very real, and I can understand where this colleague is coming from. The vast majority of Agenda for Change colleagues are employed through the NHS, so they have that level of protection. And back to my previous conversation about what do you do nationally, Caroline, as this colleague has pointed out, those T's and C's were agreed nationally under the auspices of the NHS as the employer. And then our practice nurse colleagues will be working with other primary care colleagues who are also employed by the NHS. So district nurses, school nurses, and treatment room nurses, although there's a range of that. So the example of fairness, because our majority of our practice nurses, not all, but the majority of our practice nurses, as this colleague has pointed out, are employed by independent businesses, which are GPs. So it is a really difficult place, and I've been involved in lots of conversations over the years about the exclusion and inclusion of practice nurses. And I really hope in Grampian that our practice nurse colleagues feel part of the family of professional groups that deliver care for the population of Grampian, irrespective of who their employer is. I think we've tried to do that through education, through support, etc. But specifically in relation to terms and conditions and pay, the facts are the facts, which is that practice nurses are not employed by the NHS, they are employed by GPs. What I do know is, having had a number of dialogues with GPs across Grampian, is their desire, of course, is to achieve the best pay rates for their colleagues. But the pressure that's putting them under as practices and businesses is incredibly significant. So I think you're doing the right thing in raising awareness through the RCN, through the routes that you have taken, and certainly in relation to conveying value and the contribution of practice nurses. I am happy to convey anything that is helpful. However, the key point that you have raised is the root of those pay negotiations, and the employer being the NHS is critical. So I most definitely hope that we can find a way forward for you and the colleagues that make such a valuable contribution. But as your employers work the way through their contract, I am sure that is in the forefront of their minds about matching and ensuring that pay rates are fair and are able to be benchmarked against other Agenda for Change teams and individuals. But I get that from a business perspective, that's incredibly difficult.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. Not an easy issue. So next question is coming from Sarah Norris and Beverly Miller. They've both been in touch to ask if you can clarify the future of Summerfield House as a building. There are lots of rumours that it will be closing down, and in fact, I received notification last week that one of the rumours includes demolition notices apparently had been issued for the building. So there've been lots of rumours about it closing, and people will then be based at Woodhill House. But there has been no proper communication or confirmation of this as yet. I know personally, so this is Sarah and Beverly again, I know personally there are staff in other areas who feel the same, those in Foresterhill House or Westholme, for example. Do you have any awareness, or can you provide any clarification on these things, Caroline?
Yeah, absolutely. So So I don't think it is a surprise. In fact, I'm trying to recall, I'm sure we communicated to colleagues in January time, those that are located in some of the buildings that you have mentioned, that we are looking at options for alternative accommodation, predominantly office accommodation, for a number of colleagues. And Summerfield House and Summerfield House would be one of those sites. There's lots of reasons for that. Probably the most significant reason is around the change since the pandemic of hybrid working, of smarter working. There's also the issue of the state of our built infrastructure. So if some of you have been in some of our office accommodation, it's not had investment for years, it's not fit for purpose, it's not a positive or indeed warm, cool, it's not a good environment to work in. So the facts are that we have been exploring what the alternatives would look like. I believe that work is still underway to secure the most viable option, which would be Woodhill House, which is currently very close to the Foresterhill campus, for those of you that don't know where that is, and that would be to work in that environment with other colleagues, other public sector colleagues such as police and Aberdeenshire Council colleagues. But we've not secured that yet. It has to be financially viable and it has to meet our needs. So that's the work that's underway. But I think the timing of this question is really pertinent. I also heard the rumour mill around this work. So I am clear that there will be additional communication coming out around this. And the process that we will go through as soon as we have secured, which I hope we do, we have secured Woodhill House, then colleagues will be absolutely involved in what that means for them and what the plans are to make the right moves and timescales, etc. As far as demolition notices and things, Stephen, whoever you're speaking to has more intel than me, because I haven't heard anything about that. But obviously, if we do manage to secure an alternative site, then we would be looking at the most useful next steps for the sites that we would be exiting. So, but as far as that level of detail, I don't have that at the moment. So I would hope that this week there will be more information in the brief. Alex Stevens, who is the Director of Finance, is leading in these negotiations with colleagues in Aberdeenshire Council at the moment. I think we're nearly there, but Alex has a few things he just needs to sort out. And again, that is so that we make sure we've done our due diligence on this is going to provide a better environment and be a good use of public sector and public monies. So that's where we're at the moment.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. It's one of the projects that I'm connected to. So Alex chairs the Smarter Working Programme Board and the Woodhill House Project Board as well. So I'm involved in both. I absolutely understand why colleagues, while I think you're absolutely correct. It was it feels like it was probably January, February time. There was quite a lot of communication then. But I guess if your colleagues in these buildings, it can feel like a long time. And
of course,
rumours do have this amazing ability of being very, very difficult to disprove. So as you say, hopefully
let's hopefully get that update in the brief this week. And it's. I think it's just been a matter of timing, but I can completely understand why colleagues that are going to be impacted by the change want to understand it. So let's get on top of that.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, this next question doesn't have a name in it, so I guess it must be anonymous. Are there any plans to get the reception on the main concourse of ARI up and running again? We often see patients confused and disorientated when they arrive on site. Patients end up asking other members of staff for directions and information about their appointments. And although we're happy to answer them, it can't prevent us doing the job, we're being asked to do. The volunteers do a great job in the main concourse, but they don't cover that area all of the time.
Yeah, so Stephen, it's my understanding that the added value that these colleagues bring is exactly as the colleague that has raised this states. So it's a really important job. And I believe that the posts are being advertised imminently from acute sector colleagues. So hopefully we will have that resolved and a positive outcome from that one.
Okay, thank you. Another anonymous one. I would like to ask what the plan will be for next winter. I'm sure most would agree that using elective beds is not a suitable plan given the long waiting list for treatment and diagnostic tests.
Yeah, so couldn't agree more. So positively, we have started our winter planning now. And what we are looking to do is to have a plan that is co-produced with everybody that is affected by winter. So that's just about every single one of us, to make the best use of the infrastructure that we have from a bed-based perspective, and then to make sure we take learning from our colleagues. So one of the things that we heard loud and clear from the pandemic and last year was not to split teams up, not to open surge wards. So we listened and we did that. However, what that resulted in was significant strain on particular parts of our system. And the point that you make around planned care, of course, I would like us to be in a position where we have no patients boarding in surgical beds, and that we can clearly have the best place for people to be cared for, depending on what their treatment requirements are. So the big piece of work that we are going to do around how do we make sure that we have a better winter than last year is a number of things. So you may or you may not be aware of the improvement work that is being done around, I'll call it the Unscheduled Care Collaborative. So there's a lot of work ongoing and improvement actions to make sure that the assets that we have, the beds that we have, we are using them to the best of our ability. And depending on which bit of the system you work in, you will know what that looks like. If there's a focus on making sure that we can provide alternative treatments for people coming into hospital sites, or if we can make sure that when they come in, they are assessed and supported to go home as quickly as possible. But the reality is, the demand from our population is significant. It has changed in its pattern from a pre-pandemic state. So I hope you are aware, at least at a superficial level, if not at a detailed level, of a piece of work that is about looking at our bed base across the ARI site. I'm not sure, Stephen, if anything's gone in the daily brief around this. If it's not, it probably should. But basically, we need to look at how our beds are currently distributed to particular teams and how we could do that most effectively. A part of that would be to allow us to protect planned care beds and to avoid cancellations of planned care activity to the best of our ability. So winter planning started, improvement work across the system within hospital settings, within community settings, within social care settings. Big focus nationally on winter planning as well. But the specific and the different piece of work that we're going to add into that is a review of our bed base on ARI site. That's being led by Mr. Paul Baku, who is the executive lead for planned care. So he has a vested interest in this, obviously, which will align to the colleague that's raised this. So I think winter and our approach to that is going to be really important. So it might be good to have a number of updates secured in the brief. And I'm happy to answer any questions or to do any kind of updates. It might be good for me to have a conversation with Paul. I'm sure he would love that. To share the kind of thinking behind the work that we're going to do. But a really important question, because the distress caused to patients who are waiting on planned care lists is significant.
Thanks, Caroline. Yeah, likewise, I entirely agree that the way last winter played out, had a whole load of unintended consequences and unpleasant consequences, particularly for patients having their their treatment delayed. So I guess it's hopefully our colleagues in corporate communications will be able to confirm. I believe there's been some communication in the about the ARI bed-based review in the daily brief anyway, but I would agree that it's probably worth regularly updating as that important work goes forward. So thank you. Okay, another anonymous question. Hi Caroline, I would like to know when will water dispensers, such as fountains, be available throughout the hospital? Currently, to my knowledge, there are none, and the only water source is buying bottled water from the shops or cafes, or sometimes in the staff canteen there are jugs of water. However, I feel that this isn't sufficient for patients or staff. I myself have to remember to top up my water bottle at home in the morning and hope that it lasts throughout my shift. When we're trying to be as sustainable as possible and encourage the use of reusable bottles, not having access to water sources around the hospital defeats this. Any update that you could give would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you. So any regular watchers of these Q&As will absolutely recognise that this is a pretty frequent question, particularly as we come into the warmer months. I haven't heard of any plans to update or put in place in a planned way water coolers that are compliant with IPC requirements. So if you remember the ones that you tip up and have all struggled with over the years to make sure you don't spill it everywhere, they are not supported in NHS Grampian. And so I think that would mean that we would need to look at the mains ones. So I absolutely, and I also know, because of the number of times this question has been asked, that our response is often not satisfactory, because we will come back and say that the tap water is drinkable, and colleagues that have to drink that will come back and say, yes, but it doesn't taste nice and it's warm, even if you're on the tap for several minutes, which is the advice. I'm not really content with where we've landed with this one. I think being able to provide palatable drinking water for colleagues is important. I know that plastic bottles of water is not an option environmentally or from a cost perspective. I know that asking people to drink water that doesn't taste nice or is warm is not a good option. And however, I also know that I want to keep colleagues safe, and therefore having systems of water provision that don't meet IPC guidelines is not an option. So I will go back to Chantal and just have another kind of conversation around, so what are the options? I know that everybody is trying really hard to come up with the best solution. We just don't seem to have found a way forward with this one to a satisfactory level yet. So leave that one with me, Stephen, and I will speak to Chantal about it.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. As you say, it's a question that comes up regularly. So another question. Unfortunately, I'm sort of seeing that I think a lot of this month's questions are from colleagues who are wishing to remain anonymous. So this is one of those. Does Caroline think NHS Grampian should look to expand the nursery services we currently offer our staff? The places are severely limited, and this colleague is aware that a lack of nursery space is impacting on the availability to work of several of their nursing colleagues. It seems like this would also help us make us a more attractive employer to staff across the country. And I know there would be a cost involved, but the amount it would save in expensive locum or bank fees would surely dwarf that cost.
Yeah, Stephen, so I'll start off by saying I hear nothing but absolute positive feedback about our nursery provision, and I can say that as a user, as one of my grandchildren uses that. It's nothing to do with me. Two of my children work in NHS Grampian. So I think the service that they provide and the quality of the childcare is just superb. So really important. I also know, as a grandmother now and a mum that has worked with children for many years, being able to know that your children are cared for well is a huge determining factor of where you choose to work and the hours that you choose to do. So do I think that nurseries are an important consideration for us as an organisation? Absolutely. However, having said all of that, I don't have any knowledge or understanding of the business model that sits behind the nursery and indeed what it would take to increase service provision. So I'm going to have to defer that one to hand it over to Tom Power, Director of People and Culture. Lorraine Hunter, as well as doing payroll, also I think leads up the nursery service. So I'm going to get Tom or Lorraine just to come back with some information for us for the next one. If we can maybe do the kind of update at the beginning. But needless to say, I agree that nursery provision is so important. And when you're at work, knowing that your children are not just being cared for, but having fun and is really, really important. So let's follow that one up.
Yep. Okay. Another. This next one relates in a way to car parking. An anonymous colleague is asking why there is no parking attendant in the car park in front of the emergency department during the day, as it is continually full of staff cars, which means patients attending ED, the fracture clinic, etc., and their relatives cannot get parked. The disabled bays are always full with cars with no badges, and we frequently have patients who need these spaces and cannot access them. We have asked the car parking manager, but no response as yet. Some of the other parking areas quite often have 2 attendants. We're told in the emergency department that under no circumstances should we be using the car park, which is understandable, but feel this should apply to all staff.
Thanks, Stephen. So, as ever, the car parking, and we seem to have more questions about car parking attendants or from car parking attendants over the past few sessions. So really important service, although like everything else, constrained in their resource. So I think from Chantal, there are 7 colleagues who cover all of the Foresterhill campus and Cornhill. And so making sure that they cover all areas is something that I know Chantal and the teams will continue to look at. So I think there's something about Chantal will hear this, she will watch this, making sure that we are covering the areas that are going to have the best impact from our car parking attendants, and of course making sure that we can maintain parking for people who are distressed and in an unplanned emergency situation is absolutely critical. So that would seem to make sense. And making sure that our signage and everything is clear at the front door. So I'm sure Chantal will be on this quite quickly. And again, we can get an update, but if there's nothing more to add other than they will understand if there's any additional risks and make sure that they can support that area in particular, which does feel like an area that we should be protecting equally, if not more so than other areas.
Thanks, Caroline. Okay, couple of sort of terms and conditions or sort of payroll-related questions to finish. Why are COVID absences no longer classified as special leave, i.e. not counting towards absence triggers for substantive staff, but bank workers are still being paid in full for shifts booked as special leave if they're COVID positive? This appears to be more favourable to bank than to employees in posts, and it seems to me to be grossly unfair. That, again, is from an anonymous colleague.
Okay, so I'll take a stab at this, but if it's wrong, it's wrong. So our transition from COVID being special leave to now being back to in fact, you might know more about this, Stephen, back to normal T's and C's. Sick leave will be a national direction. It will be a national T's and C's piece. Why we would still be paying bank staff in a different way, I do not know. So I would need to follow that up with Philip Shipman, who is our director of, who is our head of people and change, and Colin McNulty, who is the lead for our bank. So I can half answer that, hopefully correctly, but I don't know why we'd be paying bank staff differently, unless you do, Stephen, through your role.
I can't think of a good reason as to why we would be treating bank staff differently from our employees. I'm aware that that the arrangements for COVID special leave did change, and did change. I think it was the end of March. Was the last of the sort of terms and conditions type changes. So I would like you, and actually like the person who's posed the question, I feel it does seem unfair. So it's probably something worth following up, and hopefully we can provide an update at the start of next month's session.
Yeah, good. So if Philip or Colin are advised by somebody to watch this, then can you just get the answer to us? That would be great. Thanks.
Yeah. Okie doke. So we've got a couple more questions left. I'm reminded, Caroline, I think you'd indicated before we started the record button for today that you might be time pressured. So do you want to take those questions now, or
no? Let's just finish them just now. I'll do all the questions, and then
yeah. That's great.
I'll try to be succinct, and then I'll scoot off.
Yeah, no, that's great. Okay, so second last one, again, anonymous. I would like to ask why the default position for correcting payroll issues is that the error will be rectified in the following month's pay. The payroll department are sometimes able to make an exception. However, before this happens, payroll seem to expect employees to justify why they need the money right now. Seems very unfair that the employee bears the brunt of a mistake by the organisation.
Yeah, so I think that I obviously don't know the detail of this specific case and shouldn't, but my experience in issues such as this is that payroll try to do the best they can, and acknowledging that it's a human system, working with human systems, working with a digital system. So a couple of things. So the first thing is, the fault doesn't always lie with the payroll team. Actually, I would say in the vast majority of cases that we look at, there has been an error at some point along the journey of inputting data for payroll to output money. It doesn't mean that they don't make mistakes. Of course they do. We all do. So I think that's important to see. The other thing is that the payroll team, like every other team, has has constraints and can't do everything as timely as they would wish, because of the size of their team and the demands put upon them. And so they therefore try to manage things in a risk-based way. So I can understand why for this colleague or for other colleagues it feels uncomfortable to have to talk about finances with payroll. But I believe that in asking that question, what they're trying to understand is truly the impact this error will have on individual colleagues, and on a kind of risk-based approach in relation to hardship, impact and consequence. They try to prioritise amending things. If people can wait for it to be amended with no detriment to the next salary, definitely from a time and process perspective, that is the reality of the demand and the capacity within payroll. But as far as I believe, if particular hardship is going to be experienced, a back's payment will be made, and try to be accommodated. So it's an imperfect system. It's trying, like we all do, to manage risk, and also to be person-centred where errors are made and trying to respond to that. So again, hopefully, probably not the answer this colleague wanted to hear, but hopefully describes the way that payroll try to approach the mammoth task that they have of paying 7,000 colleagues some weekly and some monthly, every single month. So it's a big job, but pay is really, really important. I get that.
Yeah. Thanks, Caroline. Okay, so the last couple of questions, the last two questions are related. So they're from two anonymous colleagues. So can Caroline advise of the process and timescales for arrears due to the arrears of pay that are due to retirees? I need to put my teeth in. Due to those who have retired during the last year and for future retirees moving forward. Pensions are the final interaction we have with the organisation, and it seems they're forgotten, or it feels like they're forgotten about, and are therefore deemed to be unimportant. And a specific example was another anonymous colleague retired from NHS Grampian in October and had contacted payroll regarding my arrears of pay and amendment to the pension figures. As a result, I've been told that this is not a priority for payroll and that there's no timescale for processing this for me or other retirees. After over 30 years working for NHS Grampian, I find it very disappointing that my final payment and specifically my pension figures are outstanding with no timescale for resolution.
So I try to avoid these questions because pensions are a magical mystery to me, despite Lorraine's best efforts at trying to explain them to me. So a few things. I understand how frustrating this will be, and although it has been conveyed to you that it's not a priority for payroll, and I would align that to my response to the last question, I understand that it will be a priority for you, and that is important. I don't think it's acceptable that you've not been given a timeline for when this will be understood. If it is within the control of our payroll team to describe that timeline, what I have learned is that the interactions and the interdependence of the SPPA, the individual, so yourself, and our payroll department, quite often the hold-up is with SPPA. So I think that our payroll team, if this is within their gift, should be able to give you a time frame based on the things they're prioritising. And if it is not within their gift, then we are at the behest of the SPPA, which unfortunately I have no influence over. And just to formally say that please do not take this as a reflection of the value of your contribution of 30 years. And I hope you are, despite this, fully enjoying your retirement.
Thanks, Caroline. So that's the end of the questions for today. I'm aware that there are several other questions that relate to banding for healthcare support workers from allied health professionals and 4 or 5 other nursing-related questions. So we've agreed to ask June Brown, Executive Nurse Director, to do an extra session in the next couple of weeks. I can sense the relief coming off you, Caroline, that it's somebody else that's going to be asked some questions.
I've managed to get all into this week, and June, that's great. Share the pain, that's what I say.
Okay, so thanks again, Caroline. Our next regular Ask Caroline will be in another month, so I think it'll sort of go live or be sort of published on the 19th of June. So we'll hope to see you then. Thanks again, Caroline.
Super. Lovely to see you, Stephen. Thank you.